We have Brother Ken and Sister Pooley with us this morning, and Brother Ken's kindly agreed to exhort us today to the theme of the, where is it? A little servant girl. And I'm going to ask Brother Kenneth Schubert to come forward and lead us in the reading of 2 Kings chapter 5. Thanks, Ken. Look forward to words of exhortation, Brother Ken Pooley. The theme, a little servant girl. Thanks, Brother Ken.
Oh, good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be with you all, and Gillian and I bring a message of love from your brothers and sisters at Shaftesbury Road. If I asked you to choose your favourite Sunday school story, you might not pick this one. Memories. I'm not sure why. Perhaps the teacher presented it well, but I can't remember who the teacher was. Perhaps in Syria, the prophet Elisha, who was serving over the northern kingdom of Israel, and Elisha's servant, Gehazi. And as we read 2 Kings 5 together today, we met these people. And I'd like to look at each of them in turn with you. And as we do that, please think about what you have in common with each of them. And more particularly, what you can learn from them. I do want to start with that young servant girl. She was an Israelite, yes, but now a servant, or more correctly, a slave in Syria. And think for a moment about the enormous upheaval that she had faced. Given the situation, an awful story. Did she witness this with her father and brothers? We dragged from her home and carted off here, dislocated from family, from friends, from home, from country. Just imagine what she had been through. And how would you cope? How would I react if my life changed forever? If I was removed from country, from home, from family, never to see any of them again? Naaman's affliction, perhaps she could have. And feeling this compassion that comes out to us from the few words that she said in 2 Kings 5, touched by his suffering, this level of care for her master was not part of her core job description. She was there to help his wife. I'm sure it wasn't even listed in the desirable section that some job descriptions have. Certainly not expected of her at all. Yet because of her attitude, because of her character, this is how she behaved. Do you provide added value for your employer? Or simply the bare minimum to keep your job? Are you an abundant person in everything you put your hand to in life? And what about her openness with her faith? Are we like that in life, as natural as she was in what she believed? Or do people have to drag a confession of faith out of us syllable by syllable? And then, of course, there's Naaman in the story. A great picture of this man, both from what is written about him, but also about how other people acted around him. Now, Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great honourable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valour, but a leper. His position is given first, and there's no surprise there really. He was an important man. It's usual for people to know our role in life when we first meet them. He was powerful, influential, very good at what he did. But do you think the order of a summary like this is important? What comes next? A great and honourable man in the eyes of his master. Now those words say a lot, don't they? A man of integrity, a trusted advisor of the king. But was he only valued for his army service, highlighted there in red, to Syria? There's some interesting information later on in the chapter. Naaman lets us know it himself. When my master goes into the temple of Rimmon to worship there, he leans on my hand. This is much more than just a working relationship. It speaks of loyalty and close relationship. Naaman was very important to the king. And it's later in Naaman's CV that we read, he was also a mighty man of valour. It's almost written as an afterthought, isn't it? Now, I can't prove this, but I think that people who are good at fighting, good at winning wars, good at making massive changes in an organisation, good at sorting out big problems, are not usually likeable people. They're tough, decisive, self-confident, demanding, often looking for someone to blame if failure occurs. People like this often create around themselves a culture of fear, and those who work for them are often afraid to make suggestions, to give advice, because they're scared of retribution. But Naaman was not like this. The young servant girl wasn't afraid of him. Yes, she told Naaman's wife, but would she have done this if Naaman had a reputation as a hard man who never listened to anyone? And then Mrs. Naaman was very happy to pass the message on to her husband. Now, maybe not too many wives here today are afraid of their husbands, but these were very different times. We only need to read the book of Esther to see the fear, the terror that wives with powerful husbands lived with during that period. And Naaman's wife not only passed the message on to Naaman, but quoted the servant. She knew her husband would consider the advice, even though it came from a young servant girl. How many CEOs listen to their senior staff in our society, let alone the cleaner? And later, after Naaman was told by Elisha to dip in the Jordan 7 times and went off to his hotel room in a huff, the servants travelling with him still felt confident to call out his behaviour. Whilst we see in Naaman a man of strength and resolution, his character shines out in his servants' relationships with him and the way he responded to them. The attitude of the king of Syria to Naaman also tells us a lot. When Naaman asks to go to Israel, there is only support, and this wasn't a quick flight interstate with absence from work for a day or two. This was a massive trip for Naaman, a long distance, even by first-class camel with full meal service and complimentary drinks. Significant time. He not only supported the trip, but he took the time to tap out an email to the king of Israel. It wasn't much use, but at least he did it. And given that Syria had the upper hand over Israel at this time, Naaman could simply have arrived and insisted on the best of treatment, but he didn't set out for Israel with that attitude. He brought gifts, the value of those gifts. Wow. I'll leave it with you do some calculations about that much gold and silver and those beautiful garments. I don't think they came from Tajay, by the way, and how much he brought with him to give to the prophet. And then later Gehazi, Elisha's servant, had no fear chasing after Naaman for some of the loot. He'd obviously summed Naaman up as a reasonable man very quickly. He felt no compunction in chasing him. Yes, Naaman is an incredible man that we can learn a great deal from in this record. But did you notice the but at the end of that passage? But Naaman was a leper. Now, it may not have defined him, but it was reality for him. And in the best of times for every one of us, there is always a but. It's really why we need God, isn't it, in our lives? Now the king. Which king? We've already talked about the king of Syria. We're now talking about the king of Israel. What does verse 7 show us about him? When the king of Israel read the letter from the king of Syria, he rent his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and make alive that this man sends a man to me to heal him of his leprosy? Now please consider and see how he seeks a quarrel with me." Now, as you read those words, what words come into your head, into your mind? For me, they're words like fear, frustration, paranoia, distrust. Of all people, the king of Israel should have understood that Syria's victories happened for a reason. The victory was brought by God, just as verse 1 said, by Naaman, the Lord had given victory to Syria. The king was one of the reasons why Israel was in such a terrible state during this period of its history. He was why the writer of Psalm 146 wrote, and I'm quoting the NIV, "Do not put your trust in princes, in human beings who cannot save." What a message that is for us today. The king of Israel didn't think about consulting God or even consulting God's prophet. It seems he didn't even remember that there was a prophet. And we see in this king of Israel a person who dealt with life's problems alone, without consulting God at all. And for him and for all of us, this is not a sensible approach to life, is it? And so Elisha appears on the scene. When Elisha heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Please let him come to me." Oh, that there is a prophet in Israel. The king of Israel might have forgotten there was a prophet in Israel, but Naaman was going to find out. So the king, no doubt with a lot of relief, sent Naaman to Elisha. And Naaman's arrival, with great pomp and fanfare, I'm sure, received a most unusual reaction. Elisha did not invite Naaman in for a coffee. He didn't even bother to get out of his lounge chair and come out and say hi. He simply sent a message to Naaman. And some people think that Elisha didn't go out because Naaman had leprosy, but I think they're missing the point. I don't think that's the reason. Elisha took an opportunity to teach an important lesson. A lesson for Naaman, yes. A lesson for those with him, yes. But perhaps more importantly, a lesson for all time. preserved for us today. It tells us about God and what he wants from his true servants. Each of us, no matter how good we seem, has failings. And Elisha knew that while Naaman was a good man, he would fall. So he sent a strong message in two ways. Firstly, by not even going out to speak to Naaman himself, and secondly, in the request that he made of him. Elisha knew what Naaman's reaction would be. Naaman was miffed. To take the words of James 850 years later, Naaman expected to be treated like the man in gold rings in fine apparel who entered the door of the meeting and was offered the very best seat right down the front here. And of course, that's not how Elisha treated him. Notice those words that Naaman used. In the New King James Version that I'm using, it simply says, I thought. The reading we had this morning said, I said to myself, same thing. Watch out if you use words like I thought, or I said to myself, this is how this situation is going to play out, because our first thoughts are often quite mistaken. And they can often lead us, as they did with Naaman, into wrong actions. Elisha chose not to treat Naaman the way people normally did. And Naaman was in a rage. Elisha showed incredibly bad manners for any culture, let alone not receiving such an important man from the nation under which Israel was subservient at the time. Naaman had made up his mind what Elisha should do. When we turn away from God in a rage because what he's doing in our life doesn't fit with what we think should happen. But Naaman's servants intervened. And just in case we miss the lesson of that young servant girl, it's repeated here. Sometimes we think we're not in control. We say, well, I'm not involved in this situation. We think we have no ability to do anything. We don't speak. We're not on the arranging committee. No one listened to me. The message of this story from this young servant girl and from these servants of Naaman is that we can influence, we can change the course of human history. We don't realise, any of us, the impact we can have around them with a simple word or an attitude that shows them the way to behave. And at the end of the day, every single one of us can bring an individual to God. And surely that's the greatest thing that anyone in this world can do. These servants gave Naaman such terrific advice. My father, again showing how close they felt to this man. My father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, would you not have done it? How much more then when he says to you, wash and be clean? Just like the young girl, these servants saw clearly what was important. They provided good advice when most needed. And sometimes we can be like Naaman. God, a huge quest. And I am sure that if Elisha had asked Naaman for a stupendous act, off he would have gone, up for the... Sometimes we're looking for some great sign, a light from heaven, some mighty healing. But all too often God is working in ordinary things and through ordinary people. and we miss God at work because we don't see him in that little slave or in the faithful servants. God wanted something quite simple from Naaman. And at the end of the day, what God wants from us is very simple. He wants us to dip in some water, not even 7 times, just once, and give our lives to him. It's not rocket science. And Naaman listened to those loyal and faithful servants. He dipped 7 times in that dirty river, and his leprosy was cleansed. And Naaman understood the implications of what his healing meant. His life would no longer be the same. What a change in spirit we see in this man. I will never be the same again, was the attitude he understood. He was overjoyed, of course, and he returned to Elisha, a changed man. And again, if we think carefully about what we read, we find that at the Jordan, Naaman was already well on the way back home to Syria, but he returned a long distance to Elisha, going out of his way to express his thanks for what had happened. This time, Elisha came out to chat. But again, the chat didn't go the way Naaman felt that it should. Naaman wanted to heap gifts upon Elisha, but Elisha wouldn't take anything. How could he? How could he take a thing from Naaman when God had performed the miracle? The degree of Naaman's understanding, of his sensitivity, his obligation to others can be seen in the couple of verses that follow. Firstly, Naaman says, then if not, in other words, if you won't take the gifts from me, please let your servant be given 2 mule loads of earth, for your servant will no longer offer either burnt offering or sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord. This is a strange request, don't you think? Loading 2 animals with dirt to cart all the way back to Syria. Reminds me of the time one of our sons took liking to a stone in Cairns. We were pretty packed up at that stage with Gillian and I and 4 kids and lots of stuff. We had to cart that stone all the way back home for no apparent reason. But what was Naaman's thinking here? How did Naaman see something in this incident? Did he see a difference in the earth of Israel? Or was this his way to show those back home in Syria that he had changed gods? A sacrifice to Rimmon may not have looked much different in Syria to a sacrifice to the true God. But perhaps the special earth would help Naaman and the Syrians recognise the fundamental difference between Rimmon and the one true God. And so follows the second part of this request. Yet in this thing, Naaman says, may the Lord pardon your servant. When my master goes into the temple of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord please pardon your servant in this thing. Naaman had significant duties in Syria. He had found a new faith, and I think this statement means he understood what that actually meant. But he did not want to let the king down. And so he pleads his case with Elisha. He asks for understanding from God. How would you have responded? Perhaps some of us would have said, Naaman, this is unacceptable. You need to make an absolute stand. But instead, Elisha says to Naaman, go in peace. Some say Elisha never answered the question, but I think he did, absolutely. God, through his prophet, was looking at the heart of Naaman, and he liked what he saw. And again, we see in this incident another example of the flexibility and grace that God shows to those who truly want to be with him, but are faced with terrible challenges and often difficult decisions that life can present us all with. Elisha sent this man off in peace. There's one final character to consider in 2 Kings 5, and there's such a huge contrast in this character. Alongside Naaman, a Gentile, this Israelite handmaid girl who had lost everything, the servants of Naaman, Elisha, a man who had the worst job in the world, a prophet, giving his life in service to God during an absolutely awful period of Israel's history. Alongside all of them, we have Gehazi, a man consumed with greed. What a contrast. We need to look at him long and hard, I think. He was a Jewish man who had all the benefits of citizenship of that God-blessed country, and a man who enjoyed even more benefits by living with God's prophet Elisha. Huge blessings in every way. But Gehazi took these things for granted. Gehazi was greedy. Perhaps Gehazi was worried about his superannuation. And that statement that Elisha made to Gehazi after he returned echoes down through history. Is it time, Elisha said, to receive money and to receive clothing, olive groves and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male and female servants? Gehazi had received much blessing, so his failure was met with harsh punishment. His attitude was bad, and we need to examine ourselves. Are we taking for granted the blessings that God has given us and simply want more? But that's not the end of the Naaman story. When we come to the New Testament, Jesus singled out two people to teach a valuable lesson from this dark, dark period of history. The first was a Gentile woman with Elijah, who also provides a wonderful exhortation to us. And the other was this Gentile man, Naaman. Jesus said, "Assuredly I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. But I tell you truly, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, and there was a great famine throughout all the land. But to none of them was Elijah sent except to Zarephath in the region of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And many lepers were in Israel at the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman, the Syrian." At this time, so few in Israel were interested in God. They did not want to listen to God, to his prophets, but these two Gentiles did. And because of their faith, God did amazing things in their lives. And in Jesus' time, so many were not impressed even at the wonderful things that Jesus said and did. Such a strong reminder for us today to listen to God, to listen to Jesus every moment of every day. It's an amazing story, this story. It's amazing because it's in the Old Testament and not in the New. It's amazing because it shows that a Gentile man searching for God found him through a series of extraordinary circumstances. God was never just interested in Israel. Amazing because Naaman was a soldier. Not only was he a professional killer, but he had invaded God's land and a worshipper of Rimmon. But amazing too because it shows the love of God, the grace of God, to this man expressed through two of God's servants, a humble servant girl and one of the great prophets of Israel. Amazing because it shows God's flexibility for those caught up in the challenges of their responsibilities and circumstances in life. And amazing to us today because of the relevant, the compelling lessons it has for us. Do you associate with one of these characters in particular? Are you Naaman in modern clothes? Are you the young girl? Are you Elisha? Are you Naaman trusted servants? Are you Gehazi? You might see yourself in one of them, but more likely you're like me. There's something of us in each of these characters. There's more of Gehazi on some days than others. And when trouble strikes, it can be hard to be positive and accepting, like that young servant girl. Like us, these people were searching for meaning in life, searching to find God's path for themselves, searching to survive under pain and suffering. What can we learn? Do our challenges and life circumstances make or break us? Is our witness absolute? Do we trust in our own strength or seek God in our challenge? Really listen and respond to those around us? How are we handling pride? Do we consider the implications of what our dedication to God really means? Are we aware of our blessings or greedy for more? Is our life focused on the right things? Remember that phrase, is it time? Will we lie to cover up our failings? Will we go forward in faith with God at our side? So today we remember Naaman as a man who made a fundamental change for God and declared his new faith in God so absolutely with that wonderful confession of faith. Indeed, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. And we come to the bread and wine. Remember a man who gave his life in service and dedication to God and to others and made the ultimate sacrifice. And now exalted with his Father in love and righteousness, continuing to work in our lives to the honor and glory of God.